Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 122, Subjective Thoughts. We're going to talk about innovation and how the United States rejects peace. So I was watching something, and there was a small advertisement before the start of the movie. And the ad or the commercial was this guy trying to put together a baby crib, a crib. I guess baby crib is redundant, but a crib. And he couldn't do it, right? It was one of those stereotypical IKEA build it yourself and save some money kind of thing. Um, and he just couldn't do it, right? And so he puts on this VR headset, a virtual reality headset, and then he follows the instructions that are uh, on this virtual reality 3D kind of thing. And I thought what was so you might not be wowed by that, but what I thought was pretty interesting was when I taught at university, there was a innovation component that we had for a few semesters, for a few years. And I got right into that. And I talked about it in a different episode earlier episode. And I taught people how to innovate. In other words, people who never thought they had a creative bone in their body didn't understand creativity. In other words, most of society believes that creativity is in the arts, it's in music, it's in painting. Um, but is it only there? In other words, what is creativity? All that is a way to solve a problem. So you go through life and you encounter a problem, right? And this is one of the walls of the box, right? You've reached the limit of your knowledge, and so you ran out of knowledge, and so you don't know how to get past this moment in time, this problem that is now in your life, right? Because you lack knowledge. Um, you should have learned something, but you weren't taught. And so now you have to figure out, well, how am I going to solve this problem? And so the more familiar you are with the situation that you are in, the causes, the underlying uh, circumstances that create the situation that you're in, well, now you know where you can explore to try to resolve that problem, right? And so you're teaching people how to be creative. It's in all of us innately. That's how we solve problems, right? Some of us do it better than others. Some of us need to watch others and see how they solve their problems, and then we can figure out how to do it ourselves. But just trying to get students to realize that they have this creative component within their minds, it was pretty cool to be able to do that. And so I had a student, this was years ago, when VR was, getting really kind of interesting, where you can see, uh, you know, your actual surrounding, but they would augment, right? I think that's what it was called. They would augment your reality. And I think this commercial did something like that. I didn't want to repeat the commercial, but so I had a student come up with that idea, and I said, yes, you got to pitch it. And so, he had problems putting together the pitch, but it was a good idea, I thought. And to see it on TV, I don't know if it's him, but other people had the same idea and they brought it to market. They pitched it to someone. And so there it is, right? Now I'm watching it on TV. I thought it was pretty amazing. That happened actually many times where a student would pitch an idea, and then either at the same within a couple of months or later on, I'll see it in action. Someone actually was thinking along the same lines. They were able to find sort of investment or capital, and they were able to actually put it into action. But and I wasn't in the business school, I was in the humanities, but I had this theory that all of these different colleges in the university, they pretty much overlap. Like once you get to a high enough level, then you realize how they actually are very connected with each other. And so with that principle, with that mindset, with that perspective, I then try to tell people, yeah, so you're supposed to use your humanities education to bring creativity to all the other aspects of the university. There are no rules, right? And so basically the first step of innovation is to recognize that there are no rules. There are only consequences, okay? So some things we know you shouldn't do, some things we know are really, really dangerous, really, really risky, can only but fail kind of thing. And I think you've seen all those videos where people say this is why women live longer than men. And so you see men doing these ridiculous things, okay? So we know that certain things are more risky, more dangerous, and therefore the possibility of death is in there somewhere, right? So we take that into consideration. If we know that death is a possibility, then we're going to try to put in some safety features. We're doing just in case, maybe wear goggles, safety gloves, whatever. So there are no rules, there are only consequences. And it's in this process of therefore letting things go, experimenting, uh, taking, you know, taking responsibility for all the decisions that we make, we discover morality, right? We discover what works and then what doesn't. Because what is morality anyway, right? Something that works, that is beneficial, right? And so people have codified it, turned it into a law, made it into a religion, whatever. And so that becomes the norm, right? And so it's through innovation that we discover morality. It's sort of like price discovery that you have in free market economics, except you're discovering morality. And so price is an indicator of morality, where the value is. So if the price is too high or too low, you can't make any profit, uh, or you can make a profit. All of that stuff points to and guides us when it comes to morality. Now, whenever I talk like this, religious freakazoids, they always freak out, right? So Jesus freaks included. What do you mean morality is discovered? It's right there in black and white in the scripture. Yeah, it's there, but it's always subject to interpretation, right? That's why we have so many different Christianities. That's why we have so many different churches which believe different things, because it always comes down to interpretation. So what is truly moral? Well, we discover through pricing, right? What behaviors are too expensive? Those churches are going to die out. What behaviors or what beliefs turned out not to be very good? Then those churches tend to die out. Okay, so so this is how we can, discover what is good, and it's through this constant innovation, a constant improvement and solving of problems in our lives that creates a better life, a better society, better community, right? You're constantly trying to improve. Now, this continuous innovation, which Marxists hate, right? Communism, they hate this. If you read Manifesto in chapter 1, one of the things that Marx really complains about is this constant change and improvement, where the things that you learned yesterday are no longer relevant for the new situation that you are now in. He was a lazy mofo, right? I mean, the guy hated to learn anything new. He just wanted to get drunk and, you know, uh, sleep all day. And so he was very upset that capitalism or freedom constantly meant that you had to constantly, grow in your knowledge and understanding. You had to keep up with the changes in society. That in and of itself should mean that you should be an advocate of the free market because it's anti-Marxist. But in any case, so having this constantly innovating, improving, developing, advancing society is better than being stuck, right? That when you're stuck in your traditions, in your moral code, like this is my non-negotiable kind of thing. Like when you are stuck and you refuse to acknowledge that the world has changed around you, that's fine, but you have to be responsible for the cost of making those kinds of choices. In other words, society, most of society has moved on. They're no longer using landlines. They're not using VCRs or DVD players. Everything is streaming. You know, they're not using 8-pound phones any longer, right? Society has advanced. And if you choose not to, well, you know, there's a penalty, there's a cost, there's a price for that. Well, we're living in a time where there's war all around. And recently, the president of Russia, I believe he's the president, right? Putin, he made a peace offer, right? And a lot of people in America, they just rejected it right away, right? Most people probably don't even know that Russia proposed a peace treaty or a peace negotiations. And people in America basically just said, oh, you know, the people in the State Department, you know, Russia's asking for too much. You know, it's impossible. These are non-negotiables. Yeah, but and you might agree with that, okay? But, you know, last time I checked, I heard someone mention that 600,000 Ukrainians are dead, right? Just the Ukrainians, 600,000. Well, so let's just say maybe that's on the high side. So we'll lowball it a little bit and say 500,000 Ukrainians are dead because of this war. And I know some people who know people from that area, and they're like, no, yeah, this is why we have to support them even more. Okay, maybe that's the position you want to take. But let's ask those people, right? Like if you know what's going on in Ukraine, where they're basically kidnapping people off the streets and sending them to the front, right? And when you're down to 500,000 dead, right? There's not a lot of young people left, right? They either try to escape the country, sneak out of the country somewhere to avoid the draft. So what do? They start kidnapping the older men. And so there are a lot of guys who are over 60 years old who are now being sent to the front. There are pregnant women, right? There are videos I've seen where a pregnant woman is on the front, right? So, I mean, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. If you ask them, right, and that's after like 2 days of training, which is basically the time that it takes to transport you to a forward operating base, change your clothes, stick a rifle in your hand, and then drive you to the front, right? 2 days, that's how much training you get. And now you get to die on the battlefront. I think if you were to ask those people, yeah, they would say, what are you talking about? Let's go for peace. I don't want to be here. But of course, the United States will not permit it, right? They are stuck. They don't see any solution to this situation other than getting what they want. And Putin, I think, has made it very clear if you listen to some of the experts, and I mean none of the people who are currently employed by the State Department. Yeah, probably Putin would concede, like he's given hints, dropped hints here and there, that if certain conditions are met, like neutrality of Ukraine, then he'd be willing to talk about some of the other things. Scripture, as well as Sun Tzu, right? These are two different sources. They both talk about understanding that death and destruction, pointless death and destruction is to be avoided, right? So Scripture talks about you see an army coming towards you, and they're twice as big as your army. Yeah, you should probably go out and negotiate with that invading commander, right? So you can avoid needless death and destruction. Sun Tzu says the same thing, right? War is war, right? The art of war. You have to try to preserve as much of the country as possible. So these two wise sources of wisdom would probably look at U.S. foreign policy and say that they are not geniuses, right? Now imagine if 500,000 Americans were dead, right? Imagine if you had 600,000 dead American soldiers, and you might say, and you'd be right, we don't have that many soldiers in America. Well, of course we don't. That's why they're pushing the draft through, right? They're trying to streamline the draft process, because obviously if you lose all of your soldiers now fighting a technologically superior enemy, well, yeah, you're going to lose all your soldiers. And so you got to replenish them. So you have to have the draft in place. And I talked about this, I might have talked about this 2 days ago, where women now get to be drafted as well. Woohoo. So what if you had that many Americans dead? The war would become so unpopular, right? That whoever was continuing the war, they would probably get voted out of office. And that's probably why Zelensky canceled elections, right? To preserve democracy or to make sure that everyone can't express their opinion to discontinue the war. So why does America is it Putin that evil that we have to sacrifice 500,000 Ukrainians on the altar of death and destruction? In other words, where's all the money going? Probably some of you didn't hear about FTX, which was a cryptocurrency, which was basically one giant money laundering operation, sending money to the Ukraine. They put the money in FTX, and a lot of that money would come back to the United States into the pockets of politicians and other well-connected people here in the United States. And then FTX crashed, right? So that's not there anymore. So where's all the money going? Probably for bribes. And if you scratch the surface, you'll hear all the different ways that people are skimming, stealing, where the money is not going to soldiers, defenses, equipment. No, it's going into politicians' pockets. In 2015, The Guardian, which is a British news agency, they published a story. You can Google this, right? Where Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe. This was soon after the American-sponsored military unrest in 2014 in the Ukraine, where they changed the government. Right. The U.S. meddled in the Ukraine in 2014, where you have a lot of people calling elements and certain factions within Ukraine Nazis. Right. They are extremely corrupt, and we are supporting them. Right. You may have heard of the Azov Battalion, which is the openly Nazi part of Ukraine, the ethnic cleansers, if you will. They are now rising in power in the Ukraine. And so basically we are funding Nazis. Is it worth it? Right? Because Putin is that bad. But if you're the ones that are funding the Nazis, I mean, what does that make you? So we can argue all day, but as I always say, sure, you can take your believe whatever you want, but you pay for it. Leave me out of it. So if you want to send money to Ukraine, go right ahead, right? But leave me out. And if you don't want to send money, then what are you talking about, right? If you're not going to empty your pockets to continue to have people kill each other over there, then what are you talking about? And in light of all of this, right, lack of innovation, lack of creativity, doubling down, like that's non-negotiable, all this idiotic stuff that I hear too many people saying. Well, it's hard to argue that the world is in a better position, that it's better off after all of this warring, right? So how do we get beyond it? Well, you have to acknowledge reality, right? If Americans truly understood the cost of all of this war, would they continue to support it? And that is why you need to have the media, the news media, the mass media, the corporate legacy media, basically repeating the talking points of politicians, so that the people who still listen to that garbage, right, believe that America is still on the side of good, on the side of righteousness, which they are not. Okay. Subjectively speaking, of course. So, we can either innovate and continue to develop, solve problems peacefully, or we can do what so many people are doing today in the world, resorting to violence as if violence made society and life better, right? Something to think about, perhaps. You may be unconvinced, but think about it. If you had to pay for it yourself, would you? And if you refuse to, then what is the alternative? In other words, you have to discover what the morality, what the moral position is. That's it for today, and I will talk to you next time.